Hello, Robert. Nice to see you again. Let me unmute you. I'm sorry. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
We had you speak at our conference in Orlando many years ago.
I remember that. Yeah, that was great.
Thank you very much for coming back to speak with us again. Mary, it is nice to meet you for the first time.
Yes, very good to be here. Thank you, Steve.
Good. I watched a lot of your videos and I was very excited for the opportunity to hear you speak. And Dr. Abramson, thank you again for being willing to share your life's work with us. You spoke last year and we're very grateful to have you back again.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for having us and for doing this good work, bringing important information to a lot of people.
Great. Okay, so there's a lot we could talk about. So I'm going to ask very specific questions. And I guess we don't need to go into all the details because we could spend all the time on just one question. I want to ask you a lot. So the first question is, can you just give us a 30-second update, each of you, on what you've been doing for the last 10, 15 years and just your general focus? Just a quick update. Mary, you could start, then Robert, then John.
Sure. Am I on the mic?
Oh, we hear you, yes.
Great. So I have been mostly working with an IRB. I've chaired one for about 12 years. And for those of you who don't know what an IRB is, it's an institutional review board. It's an ethics board that looks at the informed consents and the protocols when people want to do human research and make sure that the subjects know all of their rights. And I also have done a little bit of court work, as an expert witness, and that's mostly what I've been doing in the arena in terms of science in this time period.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
Yeah, after I published Anatomy of an Epidemic in 2010, I started a web magazine called Mad in America. And basically the purpose of the web magazine is our mission statement says, we believe that our society has organized itself around a false narrative of science. In other words, what we were told about psychiatric diagnoses and the merits of the drugs is out of sync with the actual science, if you go into the scientific literature. So what we do on Mad in America is try to make known the actual scientific findings that do exist in the literature. We also do deconstructions of drug approval sometimes, and we do report on some of the corruption within the pharmaceutical industry. But our goal is to inform the public of what really is known from good science about psychiatric disorders and the merits of the drugs. And we now have affiliates in 11 countries with 4 more affiliates coming online this summer.
Thank you. Dr. Abramson?
So I spent about 10 years in litigation, national pharmaceutical litigation. And during those 10 years, I had access to the confidential corporate documents, usually around 20 million documents per case. And the hard drives from the pharmaceutical industry would be delivered and put into databases. So my job was to figure out how the studies were designed, how the analyses were planned, and to look at the data and to see if the data followed the design of the studies, and then to see how the drugs were marketed and to see if the marketing accurately represented the data, the clinical trial data. I did that. I learned a whole lot about how the drug industry works. Very little of it leaked out, got out to the public, and the information that did get out to the public was so technical that the public couldn't understand it. So I decided to write a book to help to explain how this was happening. It took me 6 years full time to write Sickening, and it was published last February. In Sickening, I tell the story about how the American doctors and patients are being misled about what the science really shows. And I've got to say, I wish I had another chapter to add to Sickening at the end to talk about how completely this message has been stonewalled by the mainstream media, so that the public does not get access to the information that shows that the crisis in American healthcare is actually costing more lives and a whole lot more money than the COVID pandemic did. And it's the ultimate emergency that's facing our nation in terms of excess deaths and in terms of excess spending that's bringing about this political turmoil that we're in now.
Okay, so a lot of people are confused right now because we're having a panel with 3 people called What You Need to Understand About the Medical and Pharmaceutical Industry to Protect Your Health. And what they're saying is, this doesn't make any sense because what we all know is that the most respected parts of society, universities and science, they do these clinical trials, which we are told are the, highest standard of credibility. They report them to medical journals, which we're told are the highest standard of checking on other people's work. The FDA themselves, a government agency, approves it. They tell it to our doctors who read all this information. The media reports this. So we are all saying we have fantastic, accurate, precise information on exactly what is safe, exactly what's dangerous, and exactly what to do. There's about 330 million Americans. There's 1 million doctors, and these doctors are the best. They've got the most perfect, accurate information based on the best science, the best studies. It's overseen by the best agencies. So no one has any idea why we're wasting time having a panel when we already get perfect, precise information. So why are you, I guess, writing books, talking about this? There's some miscommunication, and we don't really understand what's going on. So could you help us a little?
Or who wants to start?
Go ahead, Robert, you have the floor.
Well, I guess some people believe that story, and it's sort of the story that's out there, but you have to start with the fact that clinical trials, and when you're developing new drugs, they're paid for and designed by the drug companies, and they use those clinical trials. They design their trials with a couple of things in mind. One, they want to make sure they get past the FDA hurdle of approval, but they're also looking to tell a story. So they'll use design in other ways to make their drugs look better than existing drugs. And they'll use designs to hide side effects. And that's just the beginning, the design. In other words, it's not an independent testing organization. It's a pharmaceutical company who has a need to get that drug approved and into the market, and with a story that will enable it to be successful. So right away from the design, you have this basic element of corruption. Then who tests it? Then you have investigators. By the way, I looked at 7 recent drugs that were approved, psychiatric drugs. There were 187 authors on the 22 reports of those 7 drugs. The majority were company employees. So you even have the named authors of studies now are company employees. So in other words, we don't have independent testing of drugs. And what it produces is they're not really scientific assessments of the safety and efficacy. That's the problem. They're really marketing efforts. And then they pick the data and they use the data that they send to do the articles to journals. And it's really an information chain that doesn't provide good evidence or truthful science. It's an information change, a capitalistic information change that is used to make drugs sell well. And part of that selling drugs well is, in fact, to mislead about the nature of the efficacy. The efficacy is usually exaggerated, and the hiding of the harms. That's the process we have in place now.
So Steve,
Go ahead, John.
can I take it? Steve, the scenario you lay out with well-trained, hardworking, honorable doctors, and I believe all those things, relying on their reputable journals that publish peer-reviewed articles and clinical practice guidelines that explain what the totality of information is to doctors to guide their practice is a total sham. It's a complete hypocrisy. So as Bob says, Robert,
Bob's
which one do you
fine.
like? Bob,
Bob.
as Bob said, the drug companies are funding now about 86% of the trials. They send their manuscripts to the results of those clinical trials. They send those to journals to get peer reviewed to make sure that the data are accurate and complete. The peer reviewers look at it, the articles get published, and that becomes evidence-based medicine. The sham is, and in my experience, about 1% of doctors understand this, that the peer reviewers who accredit those articles as accurate and complete do not have access to the data from the manuscripts. They are precluded from having access to the manuscripts. So what doctors are trained to accept as evidence-based medicine is simply the manufacturer's side of the story without an independent analysis. And then when you get clinical practice guidelines, you get an amalgamation of those trials that have not been peer reviewed that are then put together without access to the primary data, and with the experts not having access to the data, and with half of the experts making the guidelines getting paid by industry, and they write the guidelines that create the standards that doctors really have to follow, because if things go bad, they'll see those clinical practice guidelines in a malpractice case. So this is, it's like a bad high school play of evidence that is presented to doctors, and the doctors are trained and disciplined to follow the bottom line in the abstract, the conclusion line in the abstract, to as if this information is true. And it's all a money-making scheme, because a significant portion of journals' incomes comes from the journals selling the articles that are published back to the drug maker for the drug reps to hand out to the doctors, to convince them by handing out articles that say the New England Journal or JAMA or Annals of Internal Medicine or whatever, to convince them that the drugs are good, and these journals attest to their goodness, whereas the journals are making a lot of money. 41% of the Lancet's income in 2005 came from selling reprints to drug companies. This is a major part of the journal's income. So we've got a sham and a market failure where the journals are making money, the researchers are making money, the academic medical centers are making money, the drug companies are making money, but the public is getting bad information, and doctors are being trained and forced to accept this bad information as evidence-based medicine. And I just want to say, when we talk about evidence-based medicine, there's no evidence without data, and we don't have the data.